Visual novels come in a variety, levels of quality that you can usually tell by looking at them. You see something like Clannad, House and Fata Morgana and the like, and you can tell this looks pretty good. And then there's a lot of lower end stuff that you can tell just isn't. And then there are the VNs that sound so absurd and ridiculous, everything in your head is saying, don't do it, but you just gotta. And that's what we're going into today. Something I didn't expect to be of high quality, but the setting was just so ridiculous I had to try. From developer Cyberstep, here is my review of Doki Doki Family for the Nintendo Switch. Before getting started, this game has nothing to do with Doki Doki Literature Club. I can find almost no info on this game at all without that game coming up, so it's worth noting that they are completely different. Doki Doki Family is centered around Goro, whom was adopted by a family after his real parents died. He lives with a stepdad that's occasionally there and his highly attractive stepsisters and stepmom. Goro visits the hospital and finds out he has a rare disease that causes his heart to slow to fatal speeds if he isn't quote-unquote excited enough to get his blood pressure up on a daily basis. Being the kind and loving family they are, his sisters and mom take it upon themselves to tend to Goro 3 times a day to get his heart racing the only way they know how. To make his innocent little boy heart flutter by being hugged, bathed, and kissed by beautiful girls. In other words, them. Now the first reaction you probably have is, wait, what? And it's a pretty funny story, but not as entertaining as I expected it to be. To be honest, it has a pretty serious tone despite the absurd setting. Now at the start of the game, stuff happened with you being introduced to this condition and them starting their little let's get you excited sessions. There's a little bit of development for each of the characters here, but I just felt detached for almost the entire game. There was a big lack of conflict in most of the routes and I just didn't feel I could connect to any of the characters. What makes matters worse is that half the routes don't get a whole lot better. Seeing Goro get with one of his stepsisters is really cute, and there are some really messed up things that happen in Himari's path. But really it's just a moment or two out of the very basic subplots. And this is unfortunate as I found Suzu's route to have a really great and beautiful ending to it, but it feels like very little was done to get to that ending. And it certainly didn't help that Cyberstep did the absolute bare minimum in translating this game to English. Not only is there no sense of line breaks with words constantly being half on one line and half on the next, periods being replaced by commas, names and words being either spelled wrong or the entirely wrong word for the statement, but the translation is just not good. It can be understood, but it looked like they translated it once and never proofread it. Now when it comes to gameplay, this is a visual novel with dating sim elements to it. As you play through it, you'll navigate story scenes and choose dialogue choices in order to guide yourself onto a certain route for your desired heroine. Now first of all, this game is a bit weird on language. Outside of the sloppy translation, you actually have to prompt a download to play the game in anything but Japanese. When you first boot it up, it gives you an option to start in Japanese or download the English translation. It doesn't take long, just a bit weird. And as far as I can tell, there's no censorship here. There's very little info about this game anywhere at all, and I can't find any records of there being an 18+ version. Considering how tame almost every excitement session is in the game, both in terms of event, artwork, and dialogue, it's likely that an 18+ version just doesn't exist. Now on to main progression. If you played a dating sim before, you know how this goes. Story scenes happen with the initial arc, and then you get dialogue choices to favor one of the girls, be it one of the sisters, the stepmother, or none of them. And you'll go on to 4 routes depending on what choices you make. It's all very simple stuff like choosing between it's good to have Harami so attached to me versus another choice that clearly veers you away from her, though the bad translation can make these choices difficult. If one of these options has too many words in it, you can't read it as it's mashed into the area with no spaces and a lot of letter overlaps. You might be able to read parts of it, but it is really unoptimized. We also have the very typical visual novel features like auto, skip, and log, though the user interface for this cannot be disabled and can be a little glitchy. There were a few times where the auto would trigger, but I couldn't get it to turn off or work at all outside of manual saving. Tap that L button to auto and tap it all you want to turn it off and it never will. That's pretty much all there is to gameplay, so let's go into content and length. Being very basic with not a whole lot here, you'll be able to clear Doki Doki Family in about 2 hours, give or take. You can probably increase that to about 3 hours if you go for the other 3 endings like I did. And thankfully the game's extra option on the main menu helps with this, showing you progress in which branching paths you haven't done yet. This was a bit of a surprise. I've not seen many VNs that actually give you a guide to show you what you've done and what you haven't. Now let's go to presentation. Visually, the game doesn't look bad. There was a lot of work done on making the character sprites and event artwork look really good. Granted, the sprites for characters are only animated with blinking eyes, but they're still well done. In performance, I have no complaints about. It plays well with very short load times. Now that that's out of the way, let's go into battery life. Doki Doki Family gives the original model a range of 5 hours and 4 up to 6 hours and 4. The Nintendo Switch Lite gets a range of 5 hours and 18 up to 6 hours and 17. The Redboxer V2 2019 model gets a range of 9 hours and 3 up to 9 hours and 56. And the OLED model gets a range of 9 hours and 34 up to 10 hours and 58. In conclusion, Doki Doki Family brings a very taboo and absurd scenario to the Switch's library of visual novels, for better or for worse. Now on the downside, this game is littered with problems. The sloppy translation and grammar, very superficial and basic plots with little to no character progression for most of the game, a mess of text on dialogue choices, the list goes on. It might be worth picking up on sale if you really dig the whole adopted brother is in love with his stepsisters and stepmom thing. It's not the worst, but it certainly isn't the best. Reviews to go rates Doki Doki Family for the Nintendo Switch a 4.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.